The cards hit the table with a sound like coffin nails. 5 men leaned forward, smoke curling between their fingers, while outside, the rain hammered red bluff into submission. But nobody was looking at the cards anymore. They were looking at her, the woman with rope burns on her wrists and murder in her eyes, dragged forward like she was worth less than the whiskey on the table. The foreman smiled, showing teeth that had seen too many fights.
I'm only gonna say this
She's in the
once.
pot, gentlemen.
You cause any
Legal
more trouble,
and binding.
and you'll answer directly
That's
to
when
me.
Wyatt Cole did something nobody expected. He didn't walk away.
Miss
He
Jensen
didn't
is
call
free.
it barbaric. He just pushed his last stack of silver forward and said 5 words that would either
By the
save them
power
both
vested in
or
me,
kill them.
I now
Then
pronounce
deal
you
me the hell
husband
in.
and wife.
Before
You
we
may
dive
kiss
into
the
what
bride.
happens next, hit that subscribe button and stick with me until the end of this story. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. Now let's get back to that saloon, where one hand of cards was about to change 2 lives forever. The Red Bluff Saloon smelled like wet leather and poor decisions. Wyatt Cole sat in the corner where he always sat, back to the wall, hat pulled low enough to discourage conversation, but not so low he couldn't watch the room. He'd been nursing the same whiskey for an hour, not because he was broke, but because staying sober in a place like this kept you breathing. The poker game started like they all did: loud talk, louder lies, and men with more pride than sense. Wyatt wasn't planning to join. He had $47 to his name, a horse that trusted him, and a homestead that wouldn't feed itself. Gambling wasn't in the plan. Then they brought her in. The foreman's name was Dutch Carver, and he worked for Silas Crow the way a disease works for death, efficiently and without remorse. He shoved through the bat-wing doors with one hand wrapped around a woman's upper arm, dragging her like she was already sold. "Gentlemen," Dutch announced, his voice cutting through the noise, "we're raising the stakes tonight." The woman stumbled, but didn't fall. Wyatt noticed that. He noticed the way she held her head up, even with her wrists bound, the way her jaw set, like she was swallowing glass, but refused to spit it out. She was maybe 25, dark hair stuck to her neck from the rain, wearing a dress that used to be nice before someone decided she wasn't worth nice things anymore. "This here's Mara Jensen," Dutch continued, shoving her toward the table. "Property of Mr. Silas Crow, offered as lawful collateral in tonight's game. Winner takes legal ownership papers, signed and witnessed." The room went quiet the way a room goes quiet before something terrible. Mara's eyes swept the crowd, not pleading, not even afraid, exactly calculating. Looking for exits, for allies, for anything that wasn't what was happening. Her gaze landed on Wyatt for half a second, and he saw something in her face that made his chest tight. She wasn't surprised. She'd known this was coming, had probably known for days, and the worst part was, she'd run out of ways to stop it. "That ain't legal," someone muttered from the bar. "It is if she's indentured," Dutch said, pulling a folded paper from his vest. "And she is. Her daddy died owing Mr. Crow $300. She's been working it off, but the interest keeps climbing. Mr. Crow's a patient man, but his patience has limits." He smiled. "Besides, she agreed to the terms." "The hell I did," Mara said. Her voice was rough, like she'd been screaming earlier and decided it wasn't worth it anymore. "You changed the terms every month until there was no way out." Dutch backhanded her casually, the way you'd swat a fly. She took it without making a sound, but Wyatt saw her eyes water and her hands ball into fists behind her back. Something cold settled in Wyatt's stomach. He'd seen men sold before prison labor debt bondage, all of it dressed up in legal words to make people feel better about the evil they were doing. He'd told himself it wasn't his fight. He'd told himself a lot of things over the years to keep moving forward. But this was different. "So who's playing?" Dutch asked, pulling out a chair. He dropped a stack of silver on the table, Crow's money probably, since men like Dutch never bet their own. "Buy-in is $50 or equivalent value." 4 men sat down. Wyatt recognized them, a ranch hand named Billy, who cheated poorly, a card sharp from Sacramento, who cheated well, a banker named Thornton, who didn't need to cheat because he owned half the town anyway, and a cattle buyer who was just drunk enough to think he was lucky. Dutch shuffled his hands quick and practiced. 5-card draw jacks or better to open. Winner takes the pot. He glanced at Mara. All of it. Wyatt stood up. Every head in the room turned. I'm in, Wyatt said. Dutch's smile widened. Wyatt Cole. Didn't figure you for this kind of game. I'm not. Wyatt walked to the table, pulled out his $47, and added his pocket watch. His father's watch, the only thing he owned that mattered. That's $70 worth. I'm buying in. You plan on keeping her? Dutch asked, all false friendliness. Or selling her on? Either way, you're participating in Mr. Crow's property rights. Deal the cards, Wyatt said. He sat down across from Dutch and didn't look at Mara. If he looked at her, if he saw whatever was in her face right now, he'd do something stupid like pull his gun and get them both killed. So he looked at the cards instead. The first hand was nothing pair of 4s. He folded. The cattle buyer won with 3 10s and laughed like he'd already won the whole pot. Second hand, Wyatt drew 2 cards to a possible straight. The card sharp raised aggressively, and everyone folded except Wyatt and Dutch. The river card gave Wyatt nothing. Dutch took it with a flush. You're down to 1 hand's worth of chips, Cole, Dutch observed. Might want to think about whether this is worth it. Wyatt didn't answer. He was thinking about a girl 10 years ago in a different town. She'd been younger than Mara, maybe 16, standing on an auction block while men bid on her father's farm, and her along with it. Wyatt had been 17 and stupid and broke. He'd wanted to do something, but he didn't have the money or the gun or the guts. He'd walked away. He still heard her crying sometimes in the space between sleep and waking. Deal, Wyatt said. Dutch dealt. Wyatt picked up his cards slowly. Jack of spades, 10 of spades, 9 of hearts, 8 of spades, 3 of clubs. Possible straight, possible flush. Not great, but not nothing. 50 to open, the banker said, pushing forward chips. The card sharp called. Billy folded. The cattle buyer folded, muttering about his luck running out. Wyatt called, pushing in his last chips. I'm all in. Dutch raised an eyebrow. Confident. No, Wyatt said. Committed. Dutch called and raised. The banker folded with a curse. The card sharp studied his cards, studied Dutch, studied Wyatt, and pushed his chips forward. Call. Draw, Dutch said. The card sharp took 1 card. Dutch took 2. Wyatt stared at his hand. He needed a 7 or a queen for the straight. The odds weren't good. He pushed the 3 of clubs forward. 1. Dutch dealt. Wyatt picked up the new card without letting his face change, but his heart did something complicated in his chest. 7 of clubs, 9 high straight. Not the best hand possible, but better than he'd had any right to hope for. Bets to you, Dutch said to the card sharp. The sharp looked at his cards again, then at the pot, then at Mara standing behind Dutch like a ghost at her own funeral. Whatever he saw there made him fold. Too rich for me, Dutch smiled. Just you and me, Cole. You want to see my cards, you'll have to match the bet. But you're all in, so I suppose we just show. Wait, Wyatt said. I've got more. You're broke. I've got a horse. Ash, gray gelding, 6 years old, best trail horse in the county. He's worth $200 if he's worth a penny. The room stirred. Everyone knew Ash. Half the men there had tried to buy him at one point or another. Dutch's smile faded slightly. You'd bet your horse on this hand? I would. You don't even know what you're playing for, Dutch said, his voice dropping. You win, you get a woman who hates you for buying her. You think that's worth your horse? I think, Wyatt said slowly, that I'm not playing to win her. I'm playing so you don't. Something shifted in the room. The bartender stopped pouring. The piano player's hands went still. Mara was staring at Wyatt now, her eyes wide. Dutch's face went hard. Fine. Your horse is in. Show your cards. Wyatt laid down the straight. The card sharp whistled low. Dutch stared at the cards for a long moment, then turned over his hand, 2 pair kings and 7s. Good, but not good enough. Son of a bitch, Dutch said softly. Wyatt reached across the table and pulled the pot toward him, the silver, the papers, the crumpled deed to something he didn't want. But his hands were shaking, and he wasn't sure why. She's yours, Dutch said, standing up. His chair scraped loud in the silence. Legal and binding. I'll need you to sign. No, Wyatt said. No. Wyatt stood up, walked around the table to where Mara stood frozen, and pulled out his knife. She flinched, but he just cut the ropes on her wrists with 2 quick motions. They fell to the floor like dead snakes. What are you doing? Dutch demanded. Wyatt ignored him. He looked at Mara for the first time since sitting down, really looked at her, and said, Can you ride? She nodded slowly, rubbing her wrists. Good. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small brass key, and pressed it into her hand. There's a gray horse tied out front. His name's Ash. That key opens the saddlebag. There's $20 in there, some dried meat, and a canteen. The horse knows the trails north, south, and east. West is desert, so don't go west. Mara stared at the key like it might bite her. You're giving her your horse, Dutch said, his voice flat with disbelief. I am. After you just bet him. I won the bet, Wyatt said. The pot's mine, and I'm giving her the horse. He looked at Mara again. Ride anywhere you want. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes were wet now, but she wasn't crying exactly. It was something bigger than crying, something that didn't have a name yet. This is insane, Dutch said. He took a step forward. Mr. Crow won't. Mr. Crow lost, Wyatt said, and his voice went cold enough to freeze whiskey. He put her in the pot, I won the pot, and now she's free. You got a problem with that, you take it up with the law. And if the law says a man can bet a woman in a card game, then the law says the winner decides what happens next. I decide she goes free. She still owes. Not anymore. Wyatt picked up the debt papers from the pot and walked to the stove in the corner. He opened the iron door and fed the papers into the flames. They curled and blackened and disappeared. Debts paid. The room was so quiet, you could hear the rain on the roof, each drop like a small heartbeat. Mara's hand closed around the key. Why? She whispered. Wyatt didn't have a good answer for that. He had 6 bad ones because he'd failed once before, because he was tired of watching men buy and sell each other, because her eyes looked like his sister's eyes before his sister stopped looking at anything at all. But what he said was, because nobody should be in a pot. Mara looked at him like she was trying to read something written in a language she didn't speak. Then she looked at the door, at the key, at the room full of men who'd watched her get dragged in like livestock. What if I ride back here tomorrow? She asked. Wyatt shrugged. Then it'll be your choice. Something happened to her face then. The hardness cracked just slightly, and underneath it was something raw and young and scared. But there was something else too, something like hope, if hope could be angry and defiant and desperate all at once. Okay, she said. She walked toward the door. Every man in the room watched her go, and nobody stopped her. Her hand touched the batwing door, hesitated, then pushed through. The rain sound got louder for a second, then softer as the door swung shut. Wyatt sat back down and picked up his whiskey. Dutch stood there, his face going through about 6 different emotions before landing on fury. You just made an enemy, Cole. Had one already, Wyatt said. Crow won't forgive this. No, Dutch agreed. He won't. He leaned in close, his breath sour. You think you're noble. You just signed that girl's death warrant. Crow don't let his property walk away. He'll hunt her down, and when he finds her, it'll be worse than anything I would have done. And then he'll come for you. Let him. Dutch straightened up, shook his head, like Wyatt was the stupidest man alive, and maybe he was, then walked out into the rain. The room stayed quiet for another minute. Then the piano player started up again, something slow and sad. The card sharp collected his remaining chips and nodded at Wyatt. "That was either the bravest or the dumbest thing I've ever seen." "Probably both," Wyatt admitted. The banker left without a word, his face sour. Billy the ranch hand bought Wyatt a drink he didn't ask for. "You know Crow will come after you," Billy said. "I know." "And you did it anyway." "Yeah." "Why?" Wyatt finished the whiskey in one swallow. It burned going down, but not as much as the look in Mara's eyes had burned that calculation of how long she had left before the world finished breaking her. "Because somebody had to," Wyatt said. He stood up, left the saloon, and walked out into the rain. Ash was gone, which meant Mara had taken him. Good. The rain soaked through his shirt in seconds, cold enough to make his teeth chatter, but he didn't hurry. He walked the 2 miles back to his homestead with his hands in his pockets and his head full of questions he couldn't answer. Would she run? Would she come back? Would Crow's men find her before she got clear? Would Wyatt wake up tomorrow with a bullet in his head for what he'd done? Probably. But he'd sleep better tonight than he had in 10 years. The homestead was dark when he got there, just a small cabin with a fence that needed mending and a barn that leaked when the wind came from the north. He'd built it himself 3 years ago after deciding he was tired of drifting. It wasn't much, but it was his. He lit a lamp, changed into dry clothes, and lay down on his bunk. Sleep didn't come. He kept seeing that moment when he'd cut the ropes when her wrists had come free and she'd just stood there like she didn't know what to do with hands that weren't tied anymore. Somewhere out there she was riding through the rain on Ash, heading towards something that might be freedom, or might be just a different kind of trap. He'd given her a choice, but choices didn't mean much when all the options were bad. Still, it was better than no choice at all. Wyatt closed his eyes and listened to the rain. Tomorrow, he'd figure out what came next. Tomorrow he'd deal with Crow and Dutch and all the consequences of doing one decent thing in a world that punished decency. Tonight, he'd just be a man who'd given away his horse and didn't regret it. That was enough. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the lamp burned low. And somewhere between Red Bluff and anywhere else, a woman named Mara rode through the darkness with a key in her hand and freedom in her veins, terrified and exhilarated, and finally, moving under her own power. The night swallowed them all, and for a few hours, nobody knew how the story would end. That was the best part. Dawn came gray and cold, the kind of morning that made promises feel like lies. Wyatt woke to the sound of nothing. No horse nickering for breakfast. No hoofbeats in the yard. Just silence, and the memory of what he'd done. He lay there for a moment, staring at the rough-hewn beams of his ceiling, and wondered if Mara had made it through the night, or if Crow's men had already found her. He got up, started coffee, and tried not to think about it. The cabin felt smaller without knowing Ash was in the barn. Funny how you could miss something you'd only been without for 6 hours. He was pulling on his boots when he heard it, the soft whinny from outside, familiar as his own breathing. Wyatt froze. Then he moved to the window fast enough to knock over a chair. Ash stood at the fence reins, dragging in the mud. Saddlebags still cinched. And under the cottonwood trees, barely visible in the morning mist, Mara sat with her back against the trunk, soaked through and shivering. She wasn't running. She was here. Wyatt grabbed his coat and went outside. Ash nickered at him, and he scratched the horse's nose automatically, but his eyes were on the woman under the trees. She watched him come, her body tense like she might bolt, but she didn't move. "You came back," Wyatt said. It came out stupid, stating the obvious, but his brain hadn't caught up to his mouth yet. "I rode out," Mara said. Her voice was hoarse, worn down. "Got maybe 5 miles past town. Then I saw them. Crow's men. 3 riders on the north road, 2 on the east. They weren't even trying to hide. Just sitting there waiting." She pulled her knees up to her chest. I used the horse to get beyond the town lines like you said, but they're watching every road out. I couldn't. Her voice cracked. I didn't know where else to go. Wyatt looked at Ash, then back at her. So you came here. I thought maybe... She stopped, swallowed hard. I thought maybe you meant it. What you said, about it being my choice. Something in Wyatt's chest pulled tight. I meant it. Even if my choice is to come back. Especially then. They stared at each other for a long moment. She looked like she'd been through a war, hair tangled with leaves, dress muddy to the knees, rope burns on her wrists starting to bruise. But her eyes were clear, calculating, still looking for the trap. I won't stay long, she said quickly. Just until I can figure out until the road's clear, or until I can get word to my aunt in Sacramento, or... She was talking faster now, like if she didn't get it all out, she'd lose her nerve. I can work. I'm good with a needle, I can mend anything, and I can cook if you've got food, and I don't eat much, and... Stop, Wyatt said gently. She stopped. You don't have to earn a place here. You're not indentured anymore. He gestured to the cabin. There's a spare room. Door locks from the inside. You can stay as long as you need to. Why... The word came out sharp, almost accusatory. You don't know me. You gave up your horse, your money, and now you're offering me shelter. Men don't do that without wanting something. Most men know. What makes you different? Wyatt thought about that. He could tell her about the girl on the auction block, about his sister, who'd married a man to pay their father's debts, and never smiled again about all the times he'd walked away from things he should have fought. But those were his ghosts, not her business. I'm not different, he said finally. I'm just tired of being the same. Mara studied him like she was reading a contract for hidden clauses. Then slowly she stood up. She swayed a little exhaustion, or fear, or both, and Wyatt moved to steady her, but she held up a hand. I can walk, she said. I know you can. And I can leave whenever I want. I know that too. And if you touch me, I won't. She looked at him hard, searching for the lie. Whatever she saw or didn't see, she finally nodded. Okay. Wyatt led Ash to the barn while Mara walked slowly toward the cabin. She moved like someone who'd been running all night and couldn't quite believe she'd stopped. At the door, she hesitated. I don't have anything, she said. No money, no clothes, nothing. Everything I owned was at... She couldn't finish the sentence. There's clothes in the trunk in the spare room, Wyatt said. They were my sister's. She left them when she married. Might fit. Is she... dead? 3 years now. He said it flat because that was the only way to say it. Fever took her. I'm sorry. Me too. He pushed open the cabin door. Come on. You need to get dry and warm or you'll be joining her. Inside the cabin was simple main room with a stove table and 2 chairs, a small bedroom off to one side, and the spare room behind a curtain. It was clean at least. Wyatt had never been good at much, but he was good at keeping things in order. Mara stood in the middle of the room dripping on his floor looking lost. Wyatt poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. Drink, he said. She did, both hands wrapped around the cup like it was the only warm thing left in the world. After a moment, some color came back to her face. The spare room, Wyatt said, nodding to the curtain. There's a trunk with clothes, a bed with clean blankets. I'll be in the barn tending Ash. Door locks from the inside, he repeated. Use it. He left before she could argue, because he could see the argument building in her face, and he was too tired to navigate it. Outside, the morning was clearing up, sun breaking through the clouds in pale strips. Ash was already eating hay, untroubled by the night's adventure. You're supposed to stay with her when I give you away, Wyatt told the horse. That was the whole point. Ash kept eating. Wyatt brushed him down, checked his hooves, and tried not to think about the woman in his cabin. Tried not to think about how this was going to play out. How Crow wouldn't just let this go. how Wyatt had maybe bought them both a day or two before everything went to hell. But for now, for this morning, they were alive and free, and that was something. When he went back inside an hour later, Mara was sitting at the table, wearing one of his sister's dresses, a simple brown thing that hung a little loose, but looked better than the ruined dress she'd arrived in. She'd tried to do something with her hair, pulling it back, but it was still damp and curling. "Found the clothes," she said unnecessarily. "I see that." "And I—" She gestured to the stove where something was cooking. "I made breakfast. It's not much, just eggs and bread. I found eggs in the hen house and bread in the cupboard, and I didn't know if you wanted me to cook or if—" "Mara." She stopped talking. "It's fine," Wyatt said. "Thank you." They ate in silence, the kind that wasn't quite comfortable, but wasn't hostile either. Just two people trying to figure out what came next. Finally, Mara set down her fork. "I need to tell you something." "All right." "My father, when he died, he owed Silas Crow $300. It was a legitimate debt. He'd borrowed it to buy seed after a bad year, and then the crops failed, and then he died, and—" She took a breath. "I tried to pay it off. I worked for Crow's wife as a seamstress, made her dresses, did alterations, took in work from other women in town. I paid $50 the first year. That's good money for sewing." It was, but Crow kept adding interest, 20% compounding monthly. By the end of the second year, I'd paid him $120 total, and I owed him $400. Wyatt's jaw tightened. "That's not legal." "It's legal if you sign the papers. And I signed." Her voice went bitter. "I was 19 and stupid, and he said if I didn't sign, he'd take the house. My mother was still alive then. I couldn't let her lose the house." "What happened to your mother?" "She died 6 months later. Then Crow took the house anyway." Mara's hands clenched on the table. "That's when Dutch came, said the debt had converted to labor, said I'd work it off in Crow's kitchens. But the kitchens became other things, and the debt kept growing. And then last week, Dutch told me Crow was done waiting. He was selling the debt to clear the books. To the card game. To whoever won." She looked up at Wyatt, her eyes hard. "You need to understand, I'm not grateful." That surprised him. No. Because you didn't save me. You bought me same as anyone else would have. You just decided not to keep what you bought." She leaned forward. "That's better than the alternative, but it's not heroic. And I won't pretend it is." Wyatt sat back, feeling like he'd been slapped, but she was right. He hadn't saved her. He'd just refused to participate in her continued enslavement, and somehow he'd expected credit for basic human decency. "You're right," he said. Mara blinked. "What?" "You're right. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who made one less awful choice in a room full of awful choices." He met her eyes. "But here's what I can promise you. You stay here, you work if you want to, or don't work if you don't want to. The door locks from the inside. And when you're ready to leave, you leave. No debt, no strings, no expectations." "Why would you do that?" "Because someone should have done it for my sister." The words came out harder than he meant them to. And no one did. Something shifted in Mara's face. Not gratitude exactly, but something like recognition. Like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay," Wyatt echoed. They finished breakfast without talking more. Then Mara insisted on washing the dishes, and Wyatt went outside to fix the fence he'd been putting off for 3 weeks. Normal work. Normal day. Except for the woman in his cabin, and the men probably planning to kill them both. Around noon, Wyatt heard hoofbeats. He set down his hammer and turned to see Sheriff Tom Lassiter riding up the path, his star catching the sunlight. "Tom," Wyatt said carefully. "Wyatt?" Tom dismounted, his face neutral. He was a decent man as far as sheriffs went, not brave, but not entirely in Crow's pocket either. "Heard you had some excitement last night." "Card game," I won. Heard you won a woman and gave her a horse. That's about right. Tom glanced at the cabin. She here. That's her business, not yours. Actually, it's mine. Tom pulled a folded paper from his vest. Silas Crow filed a complaint. Says you stole his property, both the woman and a horse. I didn't steal anything. I won it in a legal game. He's saying the game wasn't legal. Says Dutch didn't have authority to bet the woman. Then that's between him and Dutch. Wyatt kept his voice level. But I've got the papers. The bet was witnessed by 15 men. I won clean. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Crow wants the woman back. And he's claiming the horse says you bet your horse, but then gave it to her, which makes it his since she was still his property at the time of the bet. That's the stupidest legal argument I've ever heard. Maybe, but he's got lawyers and you don't. Tom looked genuinely apologetic. Look, I don't like this any more than you do, but Crow's pushing hard. He wants me to bring her in, sort this out at the courthouse. She's not going anywhere with you, Tom. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. How hard does it need to be? Wyatt's hand drifted toward his gun. Not threatening exactly, but not threatening either. Because from where I'm standing, you're asking me to help you put a woman back in chains. I'm asking you to follow the law. The law says a man can bet a woman in a card game. Maybe the law's the problem. Behind him, the cabin door opened. Mara stepped out, still wearing his sister's dress, her chin up and her hands steady. It's all right, Wyatt. It's not. I'll go. She walked toward them, and Wyatt saw Tom's eyes widen slightly at the bruise on her face from where Dutch had hit her. I'll tell the judge what happened. Let him decide. Mara, I know what they'll do. She stopped next to Wyatt, close enough that he could see she was shaking, but her voice didn't waver. But I'm not going to hide. I'm not going to run anymore. If the law says I'm property, then let the law say it to my face. Tom looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, I'm not saying you're property. I'm just saying there's a legal dispute that needs... When's the hearing? Mara interrupted. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Then I'll be there. She looked at Wyatt. We'll both be there. Tom nodded slowly. All right, that's good. Reasonable. He mounted his horse, looking relieved to be leaving. 10 o'clock. Don't make me come looking for you. He rode off, and Mara stood there watching him go until he was just a dust cloud in the distance. You shouldn't have agreed to that, Wyatt said. What choice do I have? Hide here forever, run, and have them chase me down? She turned to face him. At least this way I get to speak. I get to stand in front of a judge and tell him what Crow did. Maybe it won't matter. Probably it won't matter. But I'll say it anyway. Crow owns half the town. The judge... I know. Her voice went soft and sad. I know the deck is stacked. I know how this probably ends. But I'm tired of being afraid, Wyatt. I'm tired of running and hiding and being something that gets bought and sold. Even if I lose, at least I'll lose on my feet. Wyatt wanted to argue, wanted to tell her they could run head to California or Oregon or anywhere Crow's reach didn't extend. But looking at her face, at the stubborn set of her jaw, he understood. This wasn't about winning. This was about refusing to disappear quietly. Okay, he said. Then we'll need a plan. They spent the afternoon going through everything, the papers from the poker game, the ledger pages Wyatt had grabbed from the saloon, showing the bets, even the key he'd given Mara as proof that he'd voluntarily handed over the horse. It wasn't much, but it was something. We need a witness, Mara said. Someone who was at the game who will testify. Most of them work for Crow or do business with him. They won't risk it. What about the card sharp, the one from Sacramento? Wyatt thought about that. Maybe. He's got no stake here. But I don't know where he's staying. I do. Mara looked up from the papers. He's at the hotel. I saw him check in last week when I was delivering alterations to Mrs. Henderson. She paused. He tipped me $1 and told me I sewed better than anyone he'd seen in San Francisco. That's something, I guess. It's more than most people said. She stood up. I'll go talk to him. You're not going into town alone. Why not? Because Crow's men are probably still watching for you. Mara's expression hardened. Then I'll be careful. But I'm not hiding anymore, Wyatt. If I'm going to stand up in court tomorrow, I need to start standing up now. There was no arguing with that kind of logic, so Wyatt didn't try. Instead, he saddled Ash and rode into town with her, staying close, but not hovering. They got stares, of course, but no one tried to stop them. The hotel was a tired two-story building that smelled like tobacco and old wood. The clerk looked up when they entered, his eyes going wide. We're looking for the card player from Sacramento, Mara said before the clerk could speak. The one who was at the game last night. Room 12, the clerk said, then added quickly. But I didn't tell you that. They climbed the narrow stairs. Wyatt knocked on room 12. A moment later, the door opened. The card sharp looked at them, his expression unreadable. Figured you'd come. We need your help, Mara said directly. I know. He stepped aside. Come in. The room was small and neat, cards laid out on the bed in some kind of solitaire pattern. The sharp gestured to the chair and the edge of the bed. Sit. They sat. My name's James Keller, the sharp said. And before you ask, yes, I'll testify. I was planning to offer before you showed up. Wyatt blinked. Why? Because what happened last night was the ugliest thing I've seen in 20 years of poker, and I've seen some ugly things. James sat in the chair, his hands loose and easy. I don't work for Crow. I don't owe Crow. And I don't like men who bet women like they're cattle. You didn't say anything at the time, Mara pointed out. No, because saying something in a room full of Crow's men would have gotten me killed. He looked at her steadily. But I'll say it in court. I'll testify that the game was legal, that you won clean, Wyatt, and that you immediately freed her. Won't change the judge's mind. Judge Hackett does what Crow tells him, but it'll be on the record. Why risk it? Wyatt asked. James smiled without humor. Because I'm leaving town tomorrow afternoon, regardless of how the hearing goes. And because some things need saying, even when saying them doesn't change anything. He pulled a small notebook from his vest. I wrote down everything I remember from the game. Times, bets, who said what. You'll want this. He handed it to Mara. She took it like it was made of gold. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. This won't be enough. James stood. But maybe it'll help. And if it doesn't, well, at least you'll go down swinging. They left the hotel as the sun was setting, painting the street gold and red. Wyatt felt something in his chest loosen slightly. They had a witness. They had documentation. It still probably wasn't enough, but it was more than they'd had an hour ago. Wyatt, Mara said as they mounted Ash. Yeah. Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you. She said it simple and direct, no drama, just fact. For trying. We haven't tried yet. I know, but you're trying. That's... Her voice caught. That's more than anyone else did. They rode back to the homestead in silence. The cabin felt warmer when they got there, more lived in. Mara made dinner, just beans and cornbread, but it tasted better than anything Wyatt had made for himself in months. After dinner, Mara retreated to the spare room. Wyatt heard the lock click and felt relieved for her sake. He sat at the table cleaning his gun by lamplight and thought about tomorrow. The hearing would be a disaster. Hackett would rule for Crow because Hackett always ruled for Crow. Then what? Would they try to take Mara by force? Would Wyatt have to fight his way out of a courthouse? Would he? The answer came quick and certain. Yes. If they tried to put her back in chains, he'd fight. And probably die. But at least he'd die doing something that mattered. He was still sitting there when he heard the lock click again. Mara appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket. Can't sleep, she said. Me neither. She sat across from him, watching him work the oilcloth over the revolver. You think we'll win tomorrow? No. She laughed sharp and surprised. Most men would lie. Most men are idiots. He set down the gun. We won't win, but we'll make them work for it. And that's something. Is it enough? Has to be. Mara pulled the blanket tighter. I keep thinking about what happens after. If the judge rules for Crow, if they... She stopped, swallowed. I won't go back. I need you to know that. I'll run, or I'll fight, or I won't go back. You won't have to. You can't promise that. I can promise I won't let them take you without a fight. Wyatt. I mean it. He looked at her directly. You came back here because you thought maybe I meant what I said. About it being your choice. I did mean it. And I still do. So whatever happens tomorrow, whatever Hackett rules, you don't go anywhere you don't choose to go. That's the promise. Mara's eyes were wet. That's a promise that might get you killed. Probably. And you're making it anyway. Yeah. She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. Okay. She stood up, started toward her room, then stopped. Wyatt, that girl you mentioned, the one on the auction block. He tensed. What about her? This doesn't fix that. What you're doing for me, it doesn't change what happened to her. I know. But it's something. It has to be. Mara nodded slowly, then disappeared behind the curtain. The lock clicked again, softer this time. Wyatt finished cleaning his gun, loaded it, and set it on the table within reach. Then he blew out the lamp and lay down on his bunk, staring at the darkness. Tomorrow, they'd stand in front of a bout judge in a rigged court and tell the truth anyway. Tomorrow, they'd probably lose everything. Tomorrow might be the last day either of them saw freedom. But tonight, right now, they were both free and safe and together. And sometimes, that was all you got one good night before the storm. Wyatt closed his eyes and tried to remember how to pray. He'd forgotten most of it years ago, but the shape of the words came back. Please, just let her have a choice. Whatever happens to me, just let her have that. It wasn't much of a prayer, but it was honest. Outside, the night settled in. Somewhere in town, Crow was probably planning tomorrow's victory. Somewhere else, Judge Hackett was probably counting the money he'd already been paid to rule the right way. But here in this small cabin, with its locked doors and loaded gun, two people slept uneasily and hoped for something better than the world had taught them to expect. And for tonight, that was enough. Morning came too fast and too slow at the same time. Wyatt was already awake when the first light crept through the window, had been awake since before dawn, listening to the sounds of Mara moving around in the spare room. She was up early too, neither of them able to sleep through what was coming. He made coffee strong and bitter, and was pouring 2 cups when she emerged. She'd done something with her hair, pinned it up proper, and the brown dress looked almost respectable in the morning light. But her face was pale, and her hands shook slightly when she took the cup. Did you sleep? He asked. Some. Some. He lied. They drank in silence, both of them knowing they should eat something, but neither able to stomach the thought of food. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 9 each second, loud as a hammer fall. Finally, Mara set down her cup. We should go. I want to get there before Crow does. Want to walk in on my own feet, not be dragged in. Wyatt nodded and reached for his gun belt. You think you'll need that? Mara asked. I think I'd be stupid not to bring it. She didn't argue. They walked outside together, and Wyatt saddled Ash, while Mara stood in the yard, her arms wrapped around herself, despite the morning warmth. The ride to town was quiet, both of them lost in thoughts they couldn't share. Red Bluff looked different in daylight, less dangerous somehow, but that was a lie. Danger didn't need darkness to do its work. They could see people stopping to stare as they rode past conversations, cutting off mid-sentence curtains, twitching in windows. News had spread. Everyone knew what was happening at the courthouse this morning. They tied Ash outside the courthouse, a squat building that served as both court and town hall, its paint peeling and its steps worn smooth by decades of boots. James Keller was already there, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, looking like a man waiting for a train he knew would be late. "Morning," James said. "Thanks for coming," Wyatt replied. "Don't thank me yet." James nodded toward the street. "Crow's already inside. Brought his lawyer from Sacramento, 3 witnesses of his own, and Dutch Carver looking like he wants to put a bullet in both of you." "Subtle," Mara said dryly. "Never been his strong suit." James pushed off the wall. "Judge Hackett is presiding. He's already ruled against Crow once about 5 years ago. The next week, Hackett's barn burned down. The week after that, he ruled in Crow's favor on everything for the next 5 years. So don't get your hopes up." "We weren't," Wyatt said. They went inside together, their boots loud on the wooden floor. The courtroom was small benches on either side of a narrow aisle, leading to a raised platform where Judge Hackett sat behind a desk that had seen better decades. He was a thin man, with a thin mustache and the look of someone who'd made peace with his cowardice a long time ago. Silas Crow sat on the left side, taking up space like he owned it, which in every way that mattered he did. He was a big man, not fat, but substantial, with a face that had been handsome once before. Cruelty had carved it into something harder. His lawyer sat beside him, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit who looked bored already. Dutch Carver stood behind them, his hand resting on his gun, his eyes locked on Mara with an intensity that made Wyatt's skin crawl. On the right side, the benches were mostly empty, except for a handful of townspeople who'd come to watch the show. Sheriff Lassiter stood by the door trying to look neutral and failing. Wyatt, Mara, and James took their seats on the right. Mara sat straight-backed and still, her hands folded in her lap, but Wyatt could see the tremor in her fingers. Judge Hackett banged his gavel once. "Court's in session. This is a hearing regarding ownership dispute of one Mara Jensen and one horse registered name Ash. Mr. Crow, you brought the complaint. State your case." Crow's lawyer stood up, smooth as oil. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of property law. Miss Jensen was legally indentured to Mr. Crow following her father's death and subsequent unpaid debts. The indenture contract was signed, witnessed, and recorded with the county. Last week, Mr. Crow's foreman acting without authority included Miss Jensen in an illegal gambling stake. Mr. Cole won that stake through fraud and then compounded the crime by giving away Mr. Crow's horse, also won illegally, to the very property he'd just stolen." "That's a lie," Mara said, her voice cutting clear through the room. Hackett banged his gavel. "You'll get your turn to speak, Miss Jensen." "When?" she demanded. "After he's finished rewriting history, after you've already decided." "Miss Jensen." "No." She stood up and Wyatt saw Dutch's hand tighten on his gun. "I'm not property. I never was. And I won't sit here quietly while men who've never had to beg for their own freedom decide whether I deserve mine." The room went silent. Even Crow looked surprised. Hackett's face went red. "Sit down, or I'll hold you in contempt." "Hold me in contempt," Mara said. "Add it to the list of crimes I've committed by existing. But I'm going to speak, and you're going to listen, because this is your courtroom, and these are your decisions, and you don't get to hide from what you're doing here." Wyatt stood up slowly, moving beside her, not touching, just present. James did the same on her other side. Hackett looked at Sheriff Lassiter. "Tom, remove her." Tom didn't move. "Judge, maybe we should hear her out." "I didn't ask for your opinion, Sheriff." "No, sir, but I'm giving it anyway." Tom's voice was quiet but firm. "Let her speak." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Hackett sighed, the sound of a man who knew he was going to regret this, but couldn't quite stop himself. 5 minutes, Miss Jensen. Then you sit down and we proceed properly." Mara took a breath. "My father was John Jensen. He owned a small farm north of here, 40 acres he bought and paid for. 3 years ago he had a bad crop year and borrowed $300 from Mr. Crow to buy seed. The next year the crops failed again, My father tried to pay, but Mr. Crow said the interest had grown, 20% compounding monthly. That's standard lending practice, Crow's lawyer interrupted. Standard robbery, Mara shot back. In 2 years, $300 became $600. My father died trying to work it off. Heart gave out in the field. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. I tried to pay. I worked as a seamstress, took every job I could find. I paid Mr. Crow $120 in 18 months. She pulled out a small ledger from her pocket, worn and stained. I kept records, every payment dated and recorded. But Mr. Crow kept adding fees. Storage fees for the house I was living in, my own house. Processing fees for accepting my payments. By the time my mother died, I'd paid almost $200 and somehow owed $500. Your Honor, the lawyer said, these allegations are documented. James Keller said, standing up. He held out his own notebook. I'm James Keller, professional gambler from Sacramento. I witnessed the card game 2 nights ago. I also made it my business to ask around town yesterday. Miss Jensen's story matches what I heard from 3 different shopkeepers who employed her. She paid Mr. Crow regularly. The debt never went down. This is highly irregular, the lawyer protested. So is betting a woman in a poker game, James said flatly. But here we are. Hackett rubbed his face. Miss Jensen, even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not ruling on that, the fact remains that you signed an indenture contract. Under duress, Mara said. Dutch Carver told me if I didn't sign, he'd seize the house while my mother was still alive. She was sick. She couldn't be moved. I signed to keep her alive another 6 months. She looked directly at Hackett. Tell me you wouldn't have done the same. Hackett didn't answer. The contract itself might be questionable, James added. But what happened 2 nights ago definitely was legal. I was there. The game was witnessed by 15 men. Dutch Carver, acting as Mr. Crow's agent, placed Miss Jensen in the pot. Mr. Cole won legitimately. I watched every card and there was no cheating. The moment he won, he freed her. That's his right as the winner. He freed my property, Crow said, speaking for the first time. His voice was deep and certain. That's theft. You can't free what isn't owned, Wyatt said quietly. And people can't be owned. The law says otherwise, Crow replied. Indenture is legal. Debt bondage is legal. I've broken no laws. He has. He pointed at Wyatt. He stole my property and gave away my horse. I want both returned and I want him prosecuted. Your horse, Mara said. Wyatt won that horse. It was his to give. He bet it during the game, Crow's lawyer said smoothly. Which means it became part of the pot. Which means when Mr. Cole won, he won the horse back. But then he immediately gave it to Miss Jensen, who was still Mr. Crow's property at that moment. Which means the horse belongs to Mr. Crow. The logic was twisted, but Wyatt could see Hackett trying to follow it, trying to find a way to make it work. That's insane, James said. The horse was never in Crow's possession. Doesn't matter, the lawyer said. Legal precedent is clear. Property given to property transfers to the property owner. She's not property, Wyatt said, his voice hardening. Say it one more time and we're going to have a different kind of problem. Dutch straightened up his hand, moving to his gun. Wyatt's hand moved to his. Gentlemen, Hackett said quickly, there will be no violence in this courtroom. Then stop treating her like she's something that can be bought and sold, Wyatt said. The law is wrong. Wyatt took a step forward. And you know it. Everyone in this room knows it. You can hide behind precedent and procedure and legal language, but at the end of the day, you're talking about putting a woman back in chains because a rich man says he owns her. That's not law. That's just power. Mr. Cole, I'm not done. Wyatt's voice was steady, but there was heat underneath it. I sat in that saloon and watched Dutch Carver drag Mara in like she was livestock. I watched him put her in a pot with cash and deeds, and I watched every man in that room accept it. Not because it was right, but because nobody wanted to be the one to say it was wrong. He looked around the courtroom. How many of you were there? How many of you saw it happen and did nothing? Several men wouldn't meet his eyes. I'm not saying I'm better than you. I'm saying I got tired of being the same. So I played that hand, and I won, and I freed her. And if that's illegal, then the law needs changing. Inspiring speech, Crow said dryly. But this is a courtroom, not a philosophy debate. Judge Hackett. I've presented my case. Mr. Cole has admitted to taking my property. I want a ruling. Hackett looked like a man being asked to choose between drowning and burning. He looked at the papers in front of him, at Mara standing straight and defiant, at Crow sitting back like he'd already won. This court needs to consider all the evidence, Hackett said finally. I'm calling a recess until this afternoon, 2 o'clock. Everyone be back here then. Your Honor. Crow's lawyer started. 2 o'clock. Hackett repeated and banged his gavel. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Crow stood up, his face dark with anger, and walked out without looking at any of them. Dutch followed, but not before giving Wyatt a look that promised violence later. Mara sat down hard like her legs had given out. What just happened? Hackett's stalling, James said. He doesn't want to rule for Crow, but he's too scared to rule against him. So he's buying time hoping something changes. What could change? Mara asked. Nothing, Wyatt said grimly. He's just postponing the inevitable. Sheriff Lassiter came over, his face troubled. You all should leave town. Get out while you can. We're not running, Mara said. Then you're going to lose, Tom said bluntly. Hackett won't rule against Crow. He can't. And once he rules, I'll have to enforce it. I won't have a choice. You always have a choice, Wyatt said. Not one I can live with. Tom looked genuinely sorry. I've got a family, Wyatt. A wife and 2 kids. If I go against Crow, he'll destroy us. I'm sorry, but I'm not willing to sacrifice them for this. Then you're part of the problem, Mara said coldly. Maybe I am. Tom put his hat back on. But at least my kids will have a father. You might want to think about that before 2 o'clock. He walked out, and they were left standing in the empty courtroom. We need a new plan, James said. There is no plan, Wyatt said. Hackett's going to rule for Crow, and then I go back, Mara finished. Her voice was flat, emotionless. Or we run. Those are the options. There's a third option, Wyatt said slowly. What? We make it too expensive for Crow to win. James frowned. What does that mean? Wyatt looked at Mara. The hearing's at 2. That gives us 4 hours. In that time, we go to every business in town, every person who's ever done work for Crow or been hurt by him, and we tell them what happened. We make this public. We make it loud. We make it so that when Hackett rules for Crow, everyone knows exactly what kind of justice they're getting. That won't change the ruling, Mara said. No. But it might change what comes after. Wyatt's mind was working fast now. Crow's power comes from silence. From people being too scared or too ashamed to speak up. But if we speak up, if we make enough noise, other people might too, James finished. He nodded slowly. It's not a legal strategy, but it might be a practical one. It's dangerous, Mara said. Everything's dangerous now, Wyatt replied. At least this way we're dangerous back. They split up. James went to the saloon and the hotel places where traveling men stayed. Men who didn't owe Crow anything and might be willing to spread the story. Wyatt and Mara went door to door to the seamstresses Mara had worked with, the shopkeepers who'd employed her, the families who'd known her father. And slowly, hesitantly, people started talking. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house, admitted that Crow had raised her rent 3 times in 2 years for no reason, except that she'd complained about his men harassing her tenants. The blacksmith, a quiet man named Samuel, said Crow had bought his competitor's shop just to shut it down and force Samuel to raise his prices. The school teacher, Miss Alice Warren, whispered that 2 of her students had left town after their father couldn't pay Crow's debts. Every story was small. Every story was personal. But together they painted a picture of a man who'd built his empire on other people's suffering. By noon, half the town was talking. By 1 o'clock, people were gathering outside the courthouse, not quite a crowd, but more than a handful. And by 1:30, when Wyatt and Mara walked back to the courthouse steps, there were maybe 40 people standing there waiting. Crow was already inside, sitting in the same spot, but his face was harder now. He'd heard the talk. He knew what they'd done. "Clever," he said as Wyatt passed. "But pointless. Stories don't change laws." "No," Wyatt agreed. "But they change people." At 2 o'clock exactly, Judge Hackett entered and sat down. He looked older than he had that morning, more tired. He glanced at the windows where faces were pressed against the glass watching. "We'll proceed," he said. "I've reviewed the evidence and heard testimony. This is my ruling." He paused, and Wyatt could see him gathering himself. "The indenture contract between Silas Crow and Mara Jensen is questionable. The terms are harsh, and the interest rates are arguably predatory. However, the contract was signed voluntarily." Mara made a sound like she'd been hit. "However," Hackett continued, and his voice got slightly stronger. "The betting of a human being in a card game, even one under indenture, is morally reprehensible and legally dubious. While Mr. Crow's attorney argues that it was within his rights, I find that argument troubling." Crow leaned forward. "Therefore, I rule as follows. The indenture contract is voided on the grounds that Mr. Crow, through his agent Dutch Carver, violated the terms by treating Miss Jensen as chattel rather than an indentured servant. The debt is considered paid through services already rendered. Miss Jensen is free." The courtroom exploded. Mara grabbed Wyatt's arm, her nails digging in. Crow shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "You can't do that," Crow shouted. "I can, and I did," Hackett said, and for the first time he sounded almost strong. "As for the horse, Mr. Cole won it legally and had every right to give it away. It belongs to Miss Jensen now." "This is a joke," Crow said. "You're finished in this town, Hackett." "Maybe." Hackett banged his gavel. "But this is my ruling. Case dismissed." He stood up and walked out quickly before anyone could argue further. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mara started laughing half hysterical, and Wyatt pulled her into a hug before he could think about whether that was appropriate. She held on tight, shaking. Crow stormed past them, Dutch at his heels. At the door, Crow turned back. "This isn't over, Cole. Not by half." "Figured," Wyatt said. They walked outside into sunlight and applause. The crowd had heard the ruling through the open windows, and people were cheering. Mrs. Henderson hugged Mara. Samuel clapped Wyatt on the back. Even Sheriff Lassiter looked relieved. James Keller stood at the edge of the crowd smiling. "Well, didn't expect that." "Neither did I," Wyatt admitted. Hackett grew a spine. Or finally found the thing he was willing to risk everything for. Wyatt watched Crow's carriage disappear down the street. "Either way, he's going to pay for it." "So are you," James said quietly. Crow meant what he said. This isn't over. "I know." Mara pulled back, her face wet with tears, but her eyes bright. "I'm free," she said, like she couldn't quite believe it. "Wyatt, I'm actually free." "You are." "The law says so. The judge says so. Nobody can—" She stopped, her smile fading. "Crow's going to come after us anyway, isn't he?" "Probably." "Then we run. We leave town tonight right now and we—" "No," Wyatt said. "What?" "Running means he wins. Running means every other person he's got under his thumb stays there because they're too scared to fight back." Wyatt looked at the crowd, at the faces of people who'd finally spoken up. "We stay. We make him work for it. And maybe, just maybe, enough other people stand up that he can't crush us all." "That's a hell of a gamble," James observed. "Yeah." Wyatt looked at Mara. "But it's your choice. You're free now. Legally, officially free. You can ride anywhere you want." Mara stared at him, emotions warring across her face. Fear and hope and anger and something else. Something that looked almost like affection. Finally, she nodded. Then I choose to stay. I choose to fight. Even if it gets you killed. Even then. She straightened her shoulders. I've been running my whole life. From debt, from Crow, from everything. I'm done running. If I'm going to die, at least I'll die standing still. Wyatt felt something in his chest that might have been pride, or might have been fear, or might have been something he didn't have a name for yet. Okay then. Okay, Mara echoed. They stood there on the courthouse steps, the crowd beginning to disperse, the sun warm on their faces, and for just a moment everything felt possible. The law had sided with them. The town had stood with them. Maybe things really could change. Then Wyatt saw Dutch Carver across the street, watching them, with eyes like a hawk watching prey, and he remembered that laws were just words on paper when men with guns decided otherwise. We should get back to the homestead, he said quietly. Before dark. They rode out of town slowly. Mara on Ash and Wyatt walking beside them, neither of them speaking much. The victory felt fragile, like glass that might shatter with the wrong word. When they reached the homestead, Wyatt made them both eat something, then checked his ammunition and cleaned his rifle. Mara watched him work, her earlier joy fading into grim determination. You think they'll come tonight? She asked. If Crow's smart, he'll wait. Let us relax, think we're safe, then hit us when we're not expecting it. And if he's not smart, then yeah, tonight. Mara stood up. Teach me to shoot properly, not just tin cans. Teach me to shoot to kill. Wyatt looked at her. Mara, don't. Her voice was hard. Don't tell me I don't need to know. Don't tell me you'll protect me. I'm free now, and freedom means being able to protect myself, so teach me. He did. They spent the last hour of daylight in the yard, Wyatt showing her how to aim center mass, how to compensate for recoil, how to shoot without thinking, because thinking got you killed. She was a fast learner, her hands steady, her eyes cold. When full dark came, they barricaded the door and took turns keeping watch. Wyatt took first shift sitting by the window with his rifle across his knees. Mara tried to sleep, but couldn't, and eventually she came out and sat beside him. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. You already thanked me. I know, but I'll probably keep doing it. She was quiet for a moment. Wyatt, why did you really do it? Bet everything on that hand. He thought about lying, about giving her some noble reason that would make him sound better than he was, but they'd come too far for lies. Because I was 17 once, and there was a girl on an auction block, and I had no money, and no courage, and I walked away. And I've been walking away ever since. He looked at her. You were my chance to stop walking. That's a lot of weight to put on one card game. It was, he agreed. But it worked. Did it? Crow's still out there? Dutch is still planning how to kill us. The judge might have ruled for us, but that doesn't mean... She stopped because Wyatt had held up his hand. He'd heard something. The soft sound of horses moving slow, trying to be quiet. Get down, he whispered. Mara dropped below the window. Wyatt peered out carefully. In the moonlight, he could see them, 5 riders, maybe 6, moving toward the cabin from different directions. Professional. Organized. This wasn't angry men looking for revenge. This was a hunt. They're here, Wyatt said. Mara pulled out the revolver he'd given her earlier, checked it was loaded with hands that didn't shake. How many? At least 5 that I can see. So we're outnumbered. Yeah. She smiled, sharp and dangerous. Good. I'd hate for this to be easy. Wyatt couldn't help it. He smiled back. You're insane. Probably. She moved to the other window. But I'm free. And nobody's taking that away from me. Outside, the horses stopped. A voice called out, Dutch's voice loud in the darkness. "Cole, send out the woman and we'll let you live." Wyatt didn't answer. "Cole, don't be stupid. Mr. Crow's offering a deal, the woman for your life. That's more than fair." "Nothing about this is fair," Wyatt shouted back. "She's free. Judge said so." "Judge says a lot of things." Dutch laughed. "But out here, we're the law. Now send her out or we're coming in." Wyatt looked at Mara. She shook her head firmly. "Then come in," Wyatt yelled. "See how that works out for you." There was a pause. Then gunfire erupted, shattering both windows. Wyatt and Mara dropped glass raining down around them. Wyatt fired back, not aiming for anyone, yet just letting them know they were armed and ready. The shooting stopped. In the silence, they could hear men moving, spreading out. "They're going to try to flank us," Wyatt said. "Through the barn, probably, then hit the back door." So we split up. I watch the back, you watch the front. "Mara, we don't have a choice." She was already moving. "Besides, you taught me well." She disappeared toward the back of the cabin. Wyatt heard her checking the lock, moving furniture to barricade it. He focused on the front, watching shadows move in the darkness. Then he heard it, the soft creak of the barn door. They were inside his barn, probably planning to set it on fire or use it for cover. Either way, he had to stop them. Wyatt aimed carefully and fired through the barn wall where he'd heard the sound. Someone cursed, and he heard scrambling. He fired twice more, different spots, keeping them pinned. From the back of the cabin, Mara's gun roared. Once, twice. Someone screamed. "They're at the back door!" she yelled. Wyatt spun, torn between two fronts. This was how they'd die, caught between, unable to defend both sides. He made his choice and ran toward Mara. She was crouched by the barricaded door, her gun pointed at where wood had splintered from bullets. She fired again and the shooting from outside stopped. "Did you hit them?" Wyatt asked. "I don't know. Maybe. They stopped coming, though." For now. They moved back to the center of the cabin, back to back, covering both directions. The shooting had stopped completely now. Outside there was only silence and the sound of their own breathing. "Why'd they stop?" Mara whispered. "Either regrouping or—" The smell hit them at the same time. Smoke. They'd set fire to something, probably the barn. "No," Wyatt breathed. "Ash is in there." "Wyatt, you can't." But he was already moving toward the door. The barn was burning, flames climbing the walls. And inside, he could hear Ash screaming. Wyatt threw open the cabin door and ran into smoke and chaos. Behind him, Mara was screaming his name, but Ash's screams were louder, more desperate, the sound of an animal that trusted you and couldn't understand why you weren't saving him. The barn doors were burning flames, eating up the dry wood like it was paper. Wyatt kicked them open, and immediately the heat hit him like a fist, making his eyes water and his lungs seize. Inside, Ash was rearing against his stall hooves, crashing against wood, wild with panic. Wyatt ducked low where the smoke was thinner and ran for the stall. His hands fumbled with the latch, the metal already hot enough to burn. The latch gave, and Ash exploded out, nearly trampling him. Wyatt grabbed the horse's mane and pulled himself up, no saddle, no bridle, just desperation and muscle memory. They burst out of the barn as part of the roof collapsed behind them, sparks flying up into the night sky like angry stars. Wyatt guided Ash toward the cabin, with his knees expecting gunfire, expecting Dutch's men to finish what they started. But the shooting didn't come. Instead, he saw them, Dutch and his men, retreating toward their horses, mounting up fast. And behind them, riding hard from the direction of town, a line of riders with torches, 10 of them, maybe 12. And in front was Sheriff Tom Lassiter. Wyatt slid off Ash near the cabin door. Mara ran out and grabbed the horse's mane, steadying him, checking him for burns. Her face was black with smoke, and her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "You're an idiot," she said. "I know. You could have died for a horse. He's not just a horse." Wyatt coughed, his lungs burning. He's the thing I gave you, the choice. If they burned him, they burned that too." Mara's eyes went soft for a second, then hard again. Next time let me come with you. There won't be a next time. You don't know that. She was right. He didn't. Tom Lassiter and his riders circled Dutch's men, cutting off their escape. Tom's face was grim in the torchlight, but there was something else there too. Something like resolve. "Dutch Carver," Tom called out, his voice carrying. "You and your men are under arrest for arson and attempted murder." Dutch laughed, but it sounded hollow. "On whose authority Crow owns you, Tom? You do what he says." "Not anymore." Tom pulled out his gun, and the men with him did the same. Wyatt recognized them now: Samuel the blacksmith, James Keller, 3 ranch hands who'd been at the poker game, even old Mr. Henderson from the boarding house. "We're citizens making an arrest. You can come peaceful or not. Your choice." Crow isn't here," Tom interrupted. "And right now I don't give a damn what he thinks." He looked at Wyatt and Mara. "You two all right?" "Been better," Wyatt said. "Been worse too." "Your barn's gone." "I noticed." Tom turned back to Dutch. "Well, what's it going to be?" For a long moment, Dutch just stared. Then his hand moved toward his gun. But before he could draw, Samuel's rifle cracked, and Dutch's hat flew off his head. Dutch froze. "Next one won't miss," Samuel said calmly. Dutch's men were looking at each other, doing the math. 5 of them, 12 against them, and nobody paying them enough to die for Silas Crow's pride. One by one they raised their hands. Tom and his men moved in, disarming them, tying their hands. Dutch submitted with murder in his eyes, staring at Wyatt the whole time. "This isn't over," Dutch said. "Keep saying that," Wyatt replied. "Maybe eventually you'll be right." Tom dragged Dutch toward his horse. "We're taking them to the jail. You two should come too. Get your statements on record while everything's fresh." "Give us a minute," Wyatt said. Tom nodded and rode off with his prisoners and his impromptu posse. The sound of hoofbeats faded, leaving Wyatt and Mara standing in front of their burning barn, smoke curling up into the night sky. Mara still had her hand on Ash's neck, stroking him absently. The horse was calming down, his breathing slowing. "They came because of us," she said quietly. "Tom and the others. They heard the shooting, and they came. They did. Why risk it? They all said they wouldn't, that it wasn't worth going against Crow." Wyatt watched the flames eat what was left of his barn. Everything he'd built there, his tools, his tack, 3 years of work, turning to ash. Maybe watching that courthouse hearing changed something. Maybe seeing Hackett stand up made them think they could too. Or maybe they're just tired of being scared. Maybe that's the same thing. They stood there until the barn collapsed completely, the roof falling in with a crash that sent sparks flying higher. Wyatt felt the loss of it like a punch to the gut, but underneath the loss was something else. Relief, maybe, or just exhaustion. "We should go to town," Mara said. "Give our statements like Tom said." "Yeah." Wyatt didn't move. "Mara, when I ran into that barn—" "Don't," she interrupted. "Don't apologize for saving something you love. Don't make it smaller than it was." "I wasn't going to apologize." He looked at her. "I was going to say thank you. For coming back yesterday. For staying today. For not running when anyone with sense would have run. Anyone with sense wouldn't have bet their horse on a card game to free a stranger." "Fair point." She smiled, small and tired. "We're both idiots." "Probably. But at least we're alive. For now." They saddled Ash properly. This time the saddle had been outside the barn, spared from the fire, and rode double into town. It was past midnight when they got there, but the jail was lit up like Christmas. Half the town seemed to be crowded around it, talking in excited voices. Mrs. Henderson saw them first and pushed through the crowd. "Lord above, look at you two. Come inside, get cleaned up. I've got coffee and water and—" "We need to see Tom first," Wyatt said. "He's inside with those criminals, recording their confessions, if you can believe it." She lowered her voice. Tom's wife came down too, brought the children. She told everyone she was proud of him for finally doing the right thing. You should have seen his face. They found Tom in the jail office writing furiously in a ledger while Dutch sat in a cell glaring at everyone. The other men were in the second cell looking less defiant and more worried about what came next. Wyatt Mara. Tom set down his pen. I need your statements. What happened start to finish? They told him. About the riders surrounding the cabin, the demands, the shooting, the fire. Tom wrote it all down, his handwriting cramped but legible. When they finished, he read it back to them, had them sign it, then filed it carefully. This is solid. Combined with the testimony from my men who witnessed the arson, we've got Dutch dead to rights. The others too. What about Crow? Mara asked. Tom's face darkened. That's harder. Dutch won't admit Crow ordered this, and without that we can't touch him directly. Of course he won't, Wyatt said. Crow's got family money and lawyers. Dutch has got nothing but loyalty. Loyalty to a man who'll let him hang to save himself, Tom said. But yeah, that's the situation. So Crow walks away clean, Mara said bitterly. For now. Tom stood up. But here's what's changed. Dutch and his men are locked up. That's 5 of Crow's best enforcers off the board. And everyone in town saw what happened tonight, saw his men try to burn you out, saw citizens stand up and stop them. That's not nothing. It's not enough either, Wyatt said. No, Tom agreed. But it's a start. They left the jail and found James Keller waiting outside, leaning against the wall like he'd been there for hours. Heard you had some excitement, James said. You could say that. I rode out with Tom's group, figured you'd earned some backup after this afternoon. He pushed off the wall. I'm leaving in the morning, heading to San Francisco. Seemed safer to tell you now in case Crow decides to express his displeasure with everyone who helped you. Can't blame you, Wyatt said. I know, but I blame myself anyway. James pulled out a card, wrote something on the back, and handed it to Mara. That's where I'll be staying in San Francisco. You ever need anything, a job, a place to hide a witness to swear you're good people, you write me. Mara took the card carefully. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me. I'm running away while you're staying to fight. He tipped his hat. But good luck. You're going to need it. He walked off into the darkness, and Wyatt felt a pang of something that might have been envy. James got to leave. James got to put this town and its problems behind him. But Wyatt and Mara, they were staying. They'd chosen to stay, and that choice was going to cost them. We should find a place to sleep, Mara said. I don't think going back to the homestead tonight is smart. Mrs. Henderson offered. Then let's take her up on it. They walked to the boarding house together, both of them moving slow exhaustion, settling into their bones. Mrs. Henderson had 2 rooms ready, clean sheets and water for washing. Mara took one look at the beds and nearly cried. I'll be next door if you need anything, Wyatt said. I know. She hesitated at her door. Wyatt. When you ran into that barn, I thought you were going to die. And I realized I didn't want you to, not just because I need the help, but because... She stopped searching for words. Because you're the first person in a long time who's treated me like I matter. Wyatt's throat went tight. You do matter. I know that now. She smiled, fragile and real. Thank you for reminding me. She went inside and closed the door softly. Wyatt stood there for a moment, then went to his own room and collapsed on the bed without undressing. His clothes smelled like smoke, and his hands were blistered from the hot metal, but he was too tired to care. He woke to sunlight and voices. It took him a minute to remember where he was, why everything hurt. Then it all came back, the fire, the fight, Tom's posse, Dutch in a cell. He got up, washed his face in the basin, and went downstairs. The boarding house dining room was packed with people eating breakfast and talking loudly. At a corner table, Mara sat with Mrs. Henderson and two other women, all of them bent over papers spread across the table. "Wyatt," Mrs. Henderson called. "Come sit. We're making plans." "Plans for what?" "For what comes next." One of the other women, Miss Alice Warren, the schoolteacher, gestured to the papers. "We've been talking. What happened yesterday, what happened last night, it can't just be a moment. It has to be a movement." Wyatt sat down slowly. "I'm not sure I follow." "Crow's been running this town for 20 years, Mrs. Henderson said. "He owns half the businesses, holds debts on the other half, and nobody's ever stood up to him because we were all too scared or too alone. But yesterday, Judge Hackett stood up. Last night, Tom and 11 other men stood up. And we're saying it's time more of us did." "That's dangerous," Wyatt said. "Living under Crow is dangerous," Alice said quietly. "My students leave school hungry because their parents can't pay his prices. I had a boy last month who stopped coming entirely because his father couldn't afford to feed him and pay Crow's rent both." The third woman, who Wyatt didn't know, spoke up. "I'm Margaret Chen. I run the general store on 3rd Street. Or I did. Last week, Crow bought the building and tripled my rent. I've got 2 months before I have to close." Wyatt looked at Mara. She met his eyes steadily, something like determination in her face. "We're organizing," Mara said. "Everyone Crow's hurt, everyone he's threatened, everyone who's tired of being afraid. We're going to document everything, the illegal interest rates, the forced sales, the intimidation. And then we're going to take it to the territorial governor." "The governor won't care," Wyatt said. "Maybe not," Mrs. Henderson said. "But he'll have to respond. And if he doesn't, we take it to newspapers in Sacramento and San Francisco. James gave us contacts before he left this morning." "You talked to James?" "He came by early, said to tell you that brave idiots deserve all the help they can get." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "He also paid for your rooms for the next week and left money for supplies. Said he won it at cards, and it was dirty money anyway, might as well use it for something clean." Wyatt felt something unknot in his chest. They weren't alone. They'd never been alone, not really. They'd just all been too scared to find each other. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. "Right now, eat breakfast and rest," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "You two fought a war last night. Today, let other people fight." "But tomorrow," Alice added, "we'll need you to talk to the ranchers north of town. You know them, they trust you. And we need their stories too." Wyatt nodded slowly. "All right, I can do that." They spent the day resting and planning. More people came to the boarding house. Ranchers, shop owners, even 2 of the saloon girls who had stories about Crow's men that made Wyatt's blood boil. By evening, they had 43 signed statements and more coming. Around sunset, Sheriff Lassiter came by. He looked tired, but less haunted than he had yesterday. "Thought you'd want to know," Tom said. "Judge Hackett is staying. Crow sent men to his house this morning with threats, but Hackett stood on his porch with a shotgun and told them to get off his property. The whole street saw it." "Good for him," Mrs. Henderson said. "Also, Dutch is asking for a lawyer. Says he wants to make a deal." Tom looked at Wyatt. "He's willing to testify against Crow in exchange for a reduced sentence." "You think he'll actually do it?" Mara asked. "I think Dutch is smart enough to know Crow won't protect him now. And if Dutch testifies, we can charge Crow with conspiracy and attempted murder." Tom sat down heavily. "It won't be easy. Crow's got lawyers who'll tie this up in court for years. But it's something." "It's more than something," Alice said. "It's the first real crack in his armor." Tom left, and the meeting continued into the night. They divided up tasks, assigned territories, made lists of who to talk to and what evidence to gather. It was boring, methodical work, but it felt important. It felt like building something. Around midnight, people started leaving. Mrs. Henderson shooed the last of them out and locked the door. "You two should sleep. Tomorrow's going to be another long day." Wyatt and Mara climbed the stairs together. At her door, she stopped. "This is really happening, isn't it?" she said. "We're actually going to fight him." "Looks like. And we might lose." "Probably will," Wyatt admitted. "Crow's got money-power connections. We've got signed statements and righteous anger. In a fair fight, that wouldn't be enough." "But this isn't a fair fight." "No, it never was." He met her eyes. "But maybe that's why we have to fight anyway. Because if we don't, nobody will." Mara reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she'd touched him voluntarily beyond necessity. Her hand was small and warm and calloused from years of sewing. "I'm glad you bet everything on that card game," she said softly. "Even if it was stupid. Even if we both end up dead because of it. I'm glad you did it." "Me too." She squeezed his hand once, then let go and went into her room. Wyatt stood there for a moment, looking at the closed door, feeling the ghost of her touch on his palm. Then he went to his own room and lay down. Sleep came easier than he expected, and for the first time in days, he didn't dream about burning barns or girls on auction blocks. He dreamed about morning, about work to be done, about Mara's hand in his. The next few days blurred together. Wyatt rode out to the ranches like he'd promised, gathering stories and statements. Most of the ranchers were skeptical at first, but when they heard that Dutch was in jail and Hackett was standing firm, some of them started to believe. By the end of the week, they had 70 statements. Mara worked in town, going door to door with Alice and Mrs. Henderson. The women talked to other women, the ones who'd been hurt quietly, who'd never thought their stories mattered. A wife whose husband had been beaten for questioning Crow's prices. A widow who'd lost her house because she couldn't pay the debt her husband left. A girl barely 16 who'd been offered a choice between Crow's bed and the street. Every story added weight to their case. Every signature made the documents thicker. On the 8th day, a lawyer arrived from Sacramento. His name was Robert Chen, Margaret's cousin, and he was young and idealistic and willing to take their case for almost nothing. "This is good," Robert said, flipping through the statements. "This is actually really good. Crow's been careful, but he's made mistakes. The interest rates alone, some of these are high enough to qualify as usury under territorial law. And the intimidation, the forced sales, if we can prove pattern of behavior, we can make a criminal case." "How long will it take?" Wyatt asked. "Months, maybe a year." Robert looked apologetic. "The law moves slow, especially against powerful men. But if Dutch testifies, if Judge Hackett stands firm, if the governor responds—" He spread his hands. "We might actually win this." "And if we don't?" Mara asked. "Then at least we'll have tried. And sometimes trying is enough to change things even if you lose." That night there was a town meeting at the church. Wyatt stood in back with Mara, watching as Robert Chen presented their case to maybe 100 people. He laid out the evidence, explained the legal strategy, and asked for continued support. When he finished, Judge Hackett stood up. "I want to say something. 20 years ago, Silas Crow helped me win my election. He funded my campaign, got me votes, and in return, I ruled his way. Every time. I told myself I was just following the law, just doing my job. But I was lying." His voice shook slightly. "I was scared, and my fear let him hurt people." The room was silent. 2 days ago, I did something I should have done 20 years ago. I ruled against him, and he sent men to my house to threaten me. But you know what, I wasn't scared anymore." Hackett looked at Wyatt and Mara. "Because two people who had every reason to run decided to stay and fight. And if they could be that brave, I figured I could be brave for one damn day." People started clapping. It started small, just a few people, then grew until the whole room was applauding. Hackett sat down, his face red, and Mrs. Henderson leaned over and kissed his cheek. "We have a long fight ahead," Robert said over the noise. "Crow won't go quietly. He'll use every legal trick, every delay, every intimidation tactic he can think of. But we have something he doesn't. We have the truth, and we have each other." More applause. People started standing, calling out support, making pledges. Wyatt felt Mara slip her hand into his again, and this time she didn't let go. After the meeting, they walked back to the boarding house through streets that felt different somehow. Safer. Lighter. Like the town had been holding its breath for 20 years and finally exhaled. "Do you think we'll really win?" Mara asked. "I don't know. Maybe." Wyatt looked up at the stars, bright and distant. "But win or lose, things have changed. Crow knows he's not untouchable anymore, and that's worth something. Is it worth your barn? Your peace, almost dying? Ask me in a year." She laughed, and it sounded genuine, not bitter or scared. Just honest. Fair enough? They reached the boarding house and climbed to their rooms. At her door, Mara hesitated. "Wyatt, that promise you made, about me having a choice, always having a choice." "I remember. Does that include choosing to stay with you, after all this is over, after Crow's dealt with or not dealt with? Does that include choosing you?" Wyatt's heart did something complicated in his chest. "That's your choice to make." "I know, but I want to know if it's one you'd want me to make." He looked at her, really looked at her. Saw the woman who'd been dragged into a saloon like livestock and turned it into a revolution. Saw the courage and the fear and the stubborn hope that kept her standing when anyone else would have fallen. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'd want that. If you wanted it too." "I think I might," she smiled. "But I'm not deciding tonight. Tonight I'm too tired to decide anything except that I'm going to bed." Smart. Usually am. She opened her door, then looked back. "But tomorrow, or next week, or whenever this is all over, I might choose you. And I wanted you to know that was possible." She went inside, and Wyatt stood there grinning like an idiot. He went to his own room and lay down. Still grinning, and fell asleep thinking about futures that didn't involve running or fighting or fear. Just work and horses, and Mara's hand in his. The next morning, Dutch testified. Robert Chen brought him before a territorial judge who'd come from Sacramento specifically for the case, and Dutch laid out everything. The orders from Crow, the intimidation tactics, the beatings, the arsons. All of it. Crow was arrested that afternoon. His lawyers got him out on bail by evening, but the damage was done. The untouchable man had been touched, and everyone saw it. The trial would take months, like Robert said. But that was fine. They had time now. They had community. They had each other. And most importantly, they had choice. Mara's choice to stay, Wyatt's choice to fight, the town's choice to finally stand up. It was enough. It had to be enough. Because sometimes the story doesn't end with winning. Sometimes it ends with the decision to try and the people brave enough to stand with you while you do. And that was worth more than any pot of cards, any amount of silver, any barn or horse or easy life. That was worth everything. The trial started on a Tuesday in late September, 3 months after the night Dutch's men tried to burn them out. The courthouse was packed, people standing in the aisles and pressing against the walls. Wyatt sat in the front row beside Mara, their shoulders touching, and watched as Silas Crow walked in with his 3 lawyers like he owned the building and everyone in it. Maybe he used to. But not anymore. The prosecutor was a territorial attorney named Elizabeth Marsh, sent from Sacramento after Robert Chen's petition had reached the governor's desk. She was 40, gray-haired, and had the eyes of someone who'd seen too many powerful men walk free and was tired of it. "The territory calls Mara Jensen to the stand," she said. Mara's hand tightened on Wyatt's for just a second, then she stood and walked to the witness box. She wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had made for her, and her hair was pulled back severe and proper. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd survived something that should have killed her and refused to apologize for breathing. The bailiff swore her in. Mara's voice was steady when she said, "I do." Elizabeth Marsh approached the stand. "Miss Jensen, please tell the court how you came to be indentured to Silas Crow." Mara told it. All of it. Her father's debt, the impossible interest, her mother's death, the escalating demands. She spoke clearly without drama, just facts laid out like stones in a path. But the facts were damning enough without embellishment. Crow's lead lawyer, a man named Morrison, with slicked hair and an expensive suit, stood for cross-examination. "Miss Jensen, you signed the indenture contract voluntarily, did you not?" "I signed it under threat of losing my dying mother's home." "If that's voluntary, then yes." "But you did sign it." "I did." "And Mr. Crow provided you with food and shelter in exchange for your work." "He provided me with table scraps and a pallet in a kitchen. And later, when Dutch Carver decided that wasn't enough control, he provided me with threats and bruises." Morrison's smile thinned. "You have no proof of abuse." "I have this." Mara pulled down the collar of her dress, slightly showing a scar that ran from her collarbone to her shoulder. "Dutch did that with a knife when I told him I'd paid enough. Said Crow wanted me to understand that the debt would never be paid, that I'd work until I died or until Crow decided to sell me." She looked directly at Crow. "Which he did. In a card game. Like I was livestock." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge, a territorial judge named Whitmore, not Hackett, banged his gavel. "Order." Morrison tried to recover. The card game was organized by Dutch Carver without Mr. Crow's knowledge. "That's a lie," Dutch said from the back of the courtroom. He was chained and guarded, but his voice carried. "Crow told me to get rid of her, said she was causing problems, turning the other workers against him. He said put her in the pot, let someone else deal with her. I was following orders." "You'll get your turn to testify, Mr. Carver," Judge Whitmore said sharply. But the damage was done. The courtroom had heard it. The trial lasted 4 days. Dutch testified for 6 hours, laying out 20 years of crimes with the detachment of a man reading a grocery list. The 73 signed statements were entered into evidence. Wyatt testified about the poker game, about cutting Mara's ropes, about giving her ash, and telling her to ride anywhere she wanted. "Why did you do that?" Elizabeth Marsh asked him. "Because nobody should be property," Wyatt said simply. "And because I was tired of watching bad things happen and doing nothing about it." "Did you expect to see Miss Jensen again?" "No. I figured she'd run as far as she could, and I'd never know if she made it." He looked at Mara. "But she came back, and that changed everything." On the 4th day, Silas Crow took the stand. He was composed, confident, every inch the successful businessman. He denied everything. The interest rates were standard. The indenture was legal. The card game was unauthorized. The barn fire was unfortunate, but not his responsibility. "Mr. Crow," Elizabeth Marsh said, "you've heard testimony from 43 witnesses describing a pattern of predatory lending, intimidation, and violence. Are they all lying?" "I believe they're all mistaken," Crow said smoothly. "Or influenced by Mr. Cole and Miss Jensen's campaign against me. I'm a businessman, not a saint. Sometimes people resent success." And the scar on Miss Jensen's shoulder. "Regrettable. But Dutch Carver was my employee, not my puppet. I can't be held responsible for his individual acts of violence." "Even though he testified you ordered him to control her by any means necessary. Dutch is facing criminal charges. He's saying whatever he thinks will reduce his sentence." Crow leaned forward. "I'm not a perfect man, Miss Marsh. But I'm not a criminal. I've built this town, employed half its citizens, and provided capital when no one else would. Yes, I've profited. That's what businessmen do. But I've also done more good for Red Bluff than anyone else." It was a good speech, compelling even. Wyatt could see some of the jurors nodding slightly. Then Mara stood up. "May I ask a question?" Judge Whitmore frowned. "Miss Jensen, you're not an attorney." "Please," Mara said. "Just one question." Whitmore looked at Elizabeth Marsh, who shrugged. "One question, Miss Jensen." Mara walked to the witness stand. She didn't look angry or scared. She looked curious, like she was genuinely trying to understand something. "Mr. Crow," she said, "if you've done so much good for this town, why is everyone so afraid of you?" Crow blinked. I don't know what you mean. When I went door to door gathering statements, do you know what every single person said before they agreed to sign? They asked if their names would be public. They asked if you'd find out. They were terrified. She tilted her head. If you're such a benefactor, why does mentioning your name make people check over their shoulders? I can't control other people's irrational fears. Mrs. Henderson's rent tripled the week after she testified at my hearing. The blacksmith's supplier canceled his orders the day after he rode out to help us. 3 families who signed statements had their credit pulled at the bank you control. Mara's voice didn't rise, but it cut like wire. Those aren't irrational fears. Those are consequences, punishments, for daring to speak against you. I had nothing to do with. You had everything to do with it. Because that's how you've ruled this town for 20 years. Not through success or generosity, but through fear and punishment, and making sure everyone knows that crossing Silas Crow costs everything. She leaned closer. So my question is, if you're really such a good man, why does telling the truth about you feel like signing your own death warrant? Crow's composure finally cracked. You're a vindictive woman who can't accept that your father's failures aren't my responsibility. My father failed because you made sure he would. Because a man in debt is a man you control. And control is what you've always wanted, isn't it? Not money. Control. Mara stepped back. That's all. Thank you, Your Honor. She walked back to her seat and sat down. Wyatt wanted to grab her hand to tell her that was the bravest thing he'd ever seen, but the courtroom was too quiet, and the moment felt too fragile. Judge Whitmore cleared his throat. Mr. Morrison, redirect. Morrison stood, but he looked shaken. No further questions. Closing arguments came the next morning. Morrison spoke for an hour about reasonable doubt and business practices, and the lack of direct evidence linking Crow to specific crimes. Elizabeth Marsh spoke for 30 minutes about patterns and power, and the difference between legal and right. The law isn't just words on paper, she said. It's supposed to protect people. All people, not just the wealthy and powerful. Silas Crow has spent 20 years exploiting loopholes and intimidating witnesses and hiding behind lawyers. But this time people spoke up. This time they stood together. And this time the law has a chance to actually mean something. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Wyatt and Mara waited in the boarding house, too nervous to eat, too wired to sleep. Mrs. Henderson brought them tea they didn't drink. Samuel stopped by to say he'd testified for the prosecution, and his business hadn't burned down yet. So maybe things really were changing. At 7 in the evening, word came that the jury had reached a verdict. They walked to the courthouse in twilight, the air cool and sharp with autumn coming. The courtroom was even more packed than before, people spilling out onto the steps. Wyatt and Mara pushed through to their seats just as Judge Whitmore entered. Has the jury reached a verdict? Whitmore asked. We have, Your Honor. The foreman stood an older rancher named Pike, who'd known Wyatt's father. On the charge of conspiracy to commit assault, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of usury, guilty. On the charge of fraud, guilty. On the charge of intimidation and coercion, guilty. The courtroom exploded. People were cheering, crying, shouting. Crow sat frozen, his face gray. His lawyers were already gathering papers, preparing appeals, but for this moment right now, he'd lost. Judge Whitmore banged his gavel until the noise died down. Silas Crow, you are hereby remanded to custody pending sentencing. Bail is denied. This court is adjourned. Guards moved to take Crow away. He stood slowly, his eyes sweeping the courtroom until they landed on Wyatt and Mara. There was no anger in his face anymore, just exhaustion and something that might have been disbelief. You destroyed me, he said quietly, over a card game. No, Mara said. You destroyed yourself. We just finally said it out loud. Crow was led away, and then people were surrounding them, hugging Mara, clapping Wyatt on the back, everyone talking at once. Mrs. Henderson was crying. Judge Hackett was grinning like a man 20 years younger. Even Sheriff Tom Lassiter looked genuinely happy. This isn't the end, Robert Chen warned, but he was smiling too. Crow will appeal. His lawyers will drag this out as long as they can, but we won today, and that matters. They celebrated that night at the saloon, the same saloon where everything had started. Someone bought Wyatt a drink. He actually drank this time. Mara sat at a table with the women who'd helped gather statements, all of them talking and laughing like they'd won a war. Maybe they had. Around midnight, Wyatt and Mara slipped out. They walked through town slowly, not ready to go back to the boarding house, yet not ready for the night to end. "What happens now?" Mara asked. "I rebuild the barn, I guess. Get back to normal life." "Is there such a thing as normal anymore?" "Probably not." He smiled. "But we can try." They walked in silence for a while, past the courthouse, past the church, out toward the edge of town, where the buildings thinned out. The stars were bright overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "Wyatt," Mara said finally. "Remember what I said about choosing you, about how it was possible?" His heart kicked up. "I remember. I've decided." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I choose you, if you'll have me. If I'll—" He laughed, surprised and relieved and terrified all at once. "Mara, I gave you my horse. I nearly died in a burning barn. I think it's pretty clear I'll have you." "Good." She stepped closer. "Because I've been thinking about what comes next, and I don't want to do it alone. I want to build something with you, something real and honest and ours." "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet. A shop, maybe. You do leather work, I do sewing. We could—" She gestured vaguely. "We could make things, help people, be partners." "Partners," Wyatt repeated. "Unless you want something else. A different word, a different arrangement." He kissed her. It was probably too soon, and definitely too public, but he'd waited 3 months and nearly died twice, and he was done waiting. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for a moment the world was just them, and the stars, and the future stretching out like an open road. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. "So that's a yes to partners. That's a yes to everything." They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand. Mrs. Henderson saw them come in and just smiled knowingly, not saying a word. At the top of the stairs, Mara didn't go to her room. She went to Wyatt's instead. "I'm tired of locked doors," she said simply. "Tired of sleeping alone and waking up scared. Can I stay with you?" "Yeah?" Wyatt said, his voice rough. "You can stay." They lay together on the narrow bed, fully clothed, just holding each other. No expectations, no pressure, just the simple comfort of not being alone. Mara fell asleep first, her breathing evening out her head on Wyatt's shoulder. He stayed awake longer, listening to her breathe, feeling the weight of her trust like something sacred. Tomorrow, they'd start figuring out what came next. Tomorrow, they'd deal with Crow's appeals and rebuilding and all the practical details of building a life together. Tomorrow, they'd start becoming whatever they were going to become. But tonight, they were just two people who'd survived something terrible and chosen each other anyway. And that was enough. The days turned into weeks, then months. Crow's appeals dragged on, but he stayed in jail. His empire slowly crumbled as people started breaking contracts and refusing demands and realizing that fear only worked if you let it. Dutch Carver was sentenced to 10 years. 3 of his men got 5 each. The other 2 turned state's evidence and walked. Wyatt rebuilt his barn with help from half the town. It was bigger than the old one, with better ventilation and a loft for storing hay. Samuel donated the ironwork. Mrs. Henderson organized meals for the workers. Even Judge Hackett showed up one day with a hammer and helped frame the walls. Mara opened a shop on Main Street, a small storefront that said Jensen and Cole Mending and Tack in fresh paint over the door. She did alterations and custom sewing. Wyatt did saddles and bridles and leather repair. They split the profits 50-50, both their names on the deed, everything honest and equal. On a Saturday, 6 months after the trial, they stood in the church and got married. It was a small ceremony, just friends and the people who'd stood with them. Mara wore a dress she'd made herself ivory with blue embroidery at the cuffs. Wyatt wore his best shirt and his father's watch. Judge Hackett officiated, his voice strong and sure. "Do you, Wyatt Cole, take this woman to be your wife, to have and to hold in sickness and health for as long as you both shall live?" "I do." "And do you, Mara Jensen, take this man to be your husband, to have and to hold in sickness and health for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Mara said, and her voice didn't shake at all. They kissed and everyone cheered, and afterward there was cake and dancing, and Mrs. Henderson crying happy tears into her handkerchief. It was simple and perfect, and exactly what they'd both needed without knowing it. That night they went back to the homestead together. The cabin had a new room now built onto the side with windows that caught the morning light, and a bed big enough for two. They lay there in the darkness, listening to the wind and the sound of ash settling in the rebuilt barn. "Are you happy?" Mara asked quietly. Wyatt thought about it. About the girl on the auction block and the years of drifting and the night in the saloon when he'd decided to finally stop walking away. About everything that had led to this moment, this woman, this life. "Yeah," he said. "I am." "Me too." She curled into him, her hand over his heart. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this to turn out like everything else. But it doesn't. Maybe that's what freedom actually feels like. Not dramatic or triumphant, just steady and real and yours." "Ours," she corrected. "It's ours." "Ours," he agreed. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, two people who'd started as strangers and become something neither of them had names for until they'd built it together. A year later, Silas Crow died in prison. Heart attack, the report said. He was buried without ceremony, and only his lawyers attended. His estate was liquidated to pay his debts, and what was left was divided among his victims. Mara got back the 40 acres her father had owned, and she sold it to a young family for exactly what it was worth. No interest, no games. 2 years after that, their shop expanded. They hired 2 apprentices, a girl who wanted to learn sewing and a boy who wanted to learn leatherwork. They taught them everything, including how to negotiate fair wages and how to walk away from bad deals. 3 years after the trial, Judge Whitmore came back to Red Bluff for a legal conference. He stopped by the shop, older and grayer, but still sharp-eyed. "I wanted to see how you were doing," he said. "The case made quite an impression in Sacramento. Changed some laws, actually. Made debt bondage harder to enforce, tightened regulations on interest rates. You started something." "We just told the truth," Mara said. "Sometimes that's enough." Whitmore smiled. "Sometimes that's everything." After he left, Wyatt and Mara stood in their shop surrounded by the work they'd done together and didn't say anything for a long moment. "Do you ever think about that night?" Mara asked finally. "The card game? Sometimes? Do you regret it?" Wyatt looked at her, his wife, his partner, the woman who'd ridden back when she could have run. "Not even a little." "Good," she said, "because neither do I." Outside, the afternoon sun painted Main Street gold. People walked past their shop, some stopping to wave, some just going about their lives. Normal people doing normal things in a town that was slowly becoming something better than it had been. And above the shop door, the sign swayed gently in the wind, Jensen and Cole Mending and Tack. 2 names, equal weight, no hierarchy. Just partnership and choice, and the freedom to build something honest. In the end, that's what the story had always been about. Not rescue or heroism or dramatic gestures. Just the simple revolutionary act of giving someone a choice and meaning it. Of standing beside them while they figured out who they wanted to be. Of building something together that neither of them could have built alone. Wyatt had won her in a card game and given her his horse and said, "Ride anywhere you want." And she'd chosen to ride back. To stay. To fight. To love. To build. And together they'd turned one good choice into a lifetime of them. Some men bet to own things, but they bet to set them free. And that made all the difference.